All right, folks, welcome to Game. This is the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every Thursday, and we've done it every week since February. And every week we have more news, and we don't have to. Occasionally, we'll return to older stories, but we never really have time because Generative AI news comes fast and furious every week. We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the newest ChatGPT competitor, which is named Claude 2. A lot of people will know about this. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the unique elements of it and why it might actually just be something that has staying power. We're going to talk about OpenAI. There's a lot of news around OpenAI, everything from ChatGPT traffic drop to new models or the existing models general availability, no longer behind the closed curtain, and maybe a little bit of secret news from GPT-4. We've got funding rounds, a ton of them. We're not even going to get to them all this week. I had to punt some to next week, but some really significant things have happened. Let's see what else. We've got new products. We've got some things around deepfakes. We have a big AI fail, so I think everyone's going to enjoy this. And we'll conclude with winners and losers of the week. I'm Brett Kinsella, founder of Voice.AI, founder of Synthedia, and the host for the Generative AI News Rundown, among other things. And my colleague Eric Schwartz is with me today.
Hey,
writer at Voice.AI. Hey, Eric.
Hey, exciting to talk about all the good news this week.
Yep, and good to have you back. I was on site last week with the founders of Willow Tree. We ran Gain live, which was really fun. We actually had some audio issues, but that's okay. We sort of worked it out, and the YouTube videos really quite good, as it turns out. Great commentary, but glad to have you back in the hot seat, Eric, so that we can break everything down and tap into your unique knowledge, having written hundreds and hundreds of articles on generative AI at this point. We've been covering this, folks, since 2017, generative AI, and the GPT wave, the large language models. We started with BERT, which I think was 2018, but heavily since 2020 when GPT-3 came out. So let's get right into it, because that's what we're talking about right now. And we have this new competitor to ChatGPT. It's not really a new competitor, because Claude 1 or 1.3, as they call it, has been around for a while, but it's got some really cool features. We talk about this 100,000 token context window, but there is something that I love about it, and this is the document upload. And actually, maybe we'll just bring everybody into this. So we have Claude right here on screen. And you can upload a document. It'll summarize it for you, but we can just ask a question. And one of the things I tested out was, who won the, we'll change this one, the Austrian Grand Prix in 2023. All right. So what we're going to find out is that it doesn't know, because it was trained before the Formula One season started. So that's the first thing I want to tell people. It doesn't have internet access, although it has information that is more recent than ChatGPT. There is clearly some things from February and maybe early March that appear to be up to date. Anything after that is not. So that's one of the things that I think is really interesting. It does do the things that you want it to do. Let's see. Let's ask it a question about write a poem in the style of Dr. Seuss, about the British royal family. Like that. And it'll come up with something that'll be like, you can see it sort of coming up. It's fast. And this is another thing about it. It is fast. I didn't even actually do that in my write-up. It's like so much faster than GPT-4, which we talked about in terms of latency. More along the lines of what you get from GPT 3.5. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I think it's not surprising that they're really emphasizing how comprehensive. I mean, that context window is huge. It's really aiming for people who have a lot that they want the AI to process, rather than the more searching the internet style focus of something like Bard or Bing. I think when they first announced the 100,000 token the context window, it seemed kind of absurd. Like, why would you upload a book? But seeing how it's the idea of uploading multiple documents and maybe comparing them or discussing what they have in common, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that. And I think it's smart of them to have it as a beta be available to really anyone to test out, so that when they release the full version, they'll definitely have people lining up to buy it.
Well, see, the other reason they need to do this is they need more training data. So we know that training data is a big deal. We're going to talk a little bit about that shortly, about OpenAI. And having these chat solutions out there, even if you don't have 100 million users, even if you just pick up a couple million users, that's a lot of additional data. And I want to go back to share something about this. My favorite feature of this is, you can see I've uploaded a PDF here. It's a McKinsey study. And I just say, summarize this document for me. Okay, so one of the important things here is this is a great feature. I can get a summary of a document that I don't have to read the whole thing. I can also ask questions about it, and we'll maybe demonstrate that in just a second. But this is data that's probably not in GPT-4's training data set. It's a PDF. It doesn't live as a web page anywhere. There's some summaries and other commentary on it. But this is another way for Anthropic to actually generate a lot of new data that they can use for future training.
Yeah, and it's all about the data. I mean, that's the constant discussion is about the parameters versus the training data, and I think we've seen that parameters can definitely make an AI more powerful, but at a certain point, it does come down to what are those parameters processing? Like, what do they know, and how can they share that information?
Give people a sense of what this can do. So I uploaded this document. It gave me a nice summary. And I can ask a question about the content. What is the biggest market segment in terms of revenue? And so then it'll ask me a question. You can actually ask it to write a quiz for you. I mean, there's a lot of really cool features. And I think most people have overlooked summarization, because just getting the question answer thing is such a powerful tool. But summarization, I think, often is the most valuable feature here. And you can see this is taking it a little bit longer than just answering questions, because it's looking at the document, it's indexing it, learning, and then answering, as opposed to just answering from things that it already knows. And so, you can see what the biggest market segment is, generate retail and consumer packaged goods with 400 to 600 billion annually. So particularly if you've got these longer documents where there's a lot of dense information, think about things that come out of Congress, like laws or 10Ks or these types of things. You can upload it. It'll give you a summary. You can ask questions about it. Now, you should go verify it, and it doesn't give you source links and provenance, so it's going to be a little bit harder to find. But at the very least, it's giving you a way to quickly get some information. And I think that this is important. I think that this is a feature that ChatGPT has missed. Maybe they'll add it pretty soon, and they'll just expand. But this might be the type of thing that gets Anthropic its first million users.
Yeah, and that's before considering things like transcripts of maybe long meetings or things that maybe have mixed topics or mixed discussions, and you want to just see the things that are about a certain topic or something that a certain speaker said, and you can pull that out, summarize it, and combine that with the written elements. And there's a lot of potential and flexibility involved there.
And Nigel Wright, talks about when it processes data, how well is it filtering the noise from misinformation? This is still an open question. For the most part, the generative AI misinformation isn't part of the training data set yet, because it was trained before generative AI was really big. But I think it is an important thing. Anthropic talks about constitutional AI, which is really more about safety than accuracy.
True.
And let's see. But in any event, this is definitely an important point. Hey, Adam Chires here. Thanks a lot, Adam, for saying hi. Nigel Wright, Martin Krasik, talking about Bard in Czech, I think he said. Jürgen Gravestein, very curious to see any data on the reliability of the summarization and augmented retrieval. And this is a key point. So I'm glad we can sort of wrap up on this segment. But Anthropic is really cool. It's great at summarization. That 100,000 token context window, they say, is about 75,000 words, which is a book. It's basically a book. It's like The Great Gatsby is a little bit less than that, actually, if you think about that. And so you can just put a lot of things in. But the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is if you look at that standard ChatGPT context window of 4,000, although GPT-4 is 8,000, but most people are using 3.5. Even when you're just doing a back and forth, if you're spending 15 minutes or something back and forth with ChatGPT researching a topic, it can run out of context window about the things that you've initially asked about. And so with 100,000 tokens, this is going to be, I think, really useful for a lot of folks.
Yeah, and it is worth saying that the Anthropic did make a point of saying that they've made Claude do better at things like logic, and that it's better at multiple choice tests and law school exams, and it was founded when they founded the founders some of them came from OpenAI, and they specifically cited wanting to push back against hallucinations and incorrect answers as a central goal for them. So I think that's going to be important to them going forward also.
Yeah. So Jürgen's point, really key. I don't know about how well the summarization works, particularly these document summaries and things like that. There could be a lot of infiltration. There could still be hallucinations, although less so when you're targeting a specific source document. But that's something that's going to have to be addressed. What I do think is that this consumer application is kind of a sideline for Anthropic. I really believe that their power is going to be at the API enterprise level as a service for other applications that want this large context window, that want some speed and lower pricing than OpenAI.
Definitely.
Okay. And yeah, I did go back to this. Yeah, Martin did say that Google Bard is in Europe and can speak more languages from today, like Czech, which I didn't realize that's actually a news item that we should catch up on. So everyone, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. Gain. We run this every week. We talk about the latest news. What we're trying to do is give you a quick summary of what's going on, what we think are the top stories of the week, put it in some context, maybe add some new data since we've written the stories and that type of thing. Hopefully you see some things that you haven't before. And I will tell you, like, the super secret thing is sign up for the Synthedia newsletter. Because a lot of people will watch the show, which we like it, watch the show. But if they miss the show, they can watch it later on YouTube, or if the Synthedia newsletter basically gives you all the links of the stories we just talked about. So if you just want like a link list of the top stories, just sign up for the Synthedia newsletter. Maybe Andrew, you can put in the chat the link for that. Okay, let's get to our next story today. And that is, let's see, I think I might need to share a new tab. But this is ChatGPT web traffic drops. Is this true? Is it significant? What do you think, Eric?
I mean, it's not shocking to me that it would drop, if only because the sheer heights from which it hit before. It's not too surprising. But also, I think it may also be a symptom of the fact that ChatGPT, or at least the model behind it, is now very, very widespread, popping up everywhere. I mean, who knows how many people were going to ChatGPT and now are just using Bing, or how many people are working at a company where they're using the API in some form, if they're over with the Salesforce or something like that. So I think it's definitely probably true and may potentially be a problem, but at this point it feels like the widened access in general of the technology makes the specific visits to the website less important.
Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, is this going to be a billion person or a billion user application? It doesn't seem like that's going to happen. Maybe over time, give it a couple years, maybe it gets up to that. And so the growth rate has really it may have tapered, but a couple of really key things. It may not actually have tapered at all. I suspect that based on how little this curve has dropped, usage of ChatGPT is actually up. What this doesn't take into account, this data widely reported on, is just visits to the website. It came immediately after the launch of the mobile app on iPhone. right?
Exactly.
And so there were a lot of people we knew in the past, and I think it was as many as 45 or 50% of the people were primarily using ChatGPT on their mobile device anyway, with the website, which was just a terrible experience. And the mobile app is actually pretty good. I mean, I know some people have had issues from time to time, but for the most part, it is good. So I assume a lot of those people switched over, and that's just fewer website visits. We also looked at our good old handy Google search trends data, and you can see that the search trend on ChatGPT is also going down, right? See, it's a nice parabola there. With that said, are they still searching for ChatGPT because they already know if they're a user? I think the more significant thing that I thought was that session time seems to have gone down as well. And so that's like something that might be interesting. But let's face it, there's a novelty effect that's wearing off. There's competition. We have Anthropic now, but obviously Bing Chat, Google Bard getting a lot better, Perplexity, which we just had on the Synthesia show. All those things. This is inevitable that there's going to be a little bit of pullback. I still think it's the dominant player in the space.
Yeah, and I think that app element is important. I mean, we talked a while back about when South Park decided to involve ChatGPT in an episode, and there wasn't a mobile app yet. So South Park literally just made one up for the episode because they understood that that's what people would prefer to use rather than going to a website, especially on their phone. So. Well,
one other thing that someone did mention, it was a response to my post the other day, and thanks. I love the Synthesia readers. A lot of them will just like respond to the email and they sort of get these little tidbits. It's like, oh, it did also coincide with like summer break from school, right? So a lot of schools like and we think that academia is actually, use in academia is actually a very significant amount of traffic. And so, we'll see if this becomes a seasonal situation over the years. Now, there's more news from OpenAI this week too, which I think is significant. So GPT-4, DALL-E, Whisper, in the ChatGPT model APIs, they're now generally available. People can access them. They were not previously. They were, you had to basically ask for access to them. And I think this has actually hurt OpenAI in a number of ways. In particular, DALL-E, being, hard to get access to for some folks, and, Stable Diffusion being so easily accessible either through their own model or through Stability AI. Whisper, we saw that they released it in open source. People started immediately offering a solution based on the open source version of Whisper. And so they like, oh, well, maybe we should offer this ourselves. And so they rolled that out in March, but again, in limited beta access. So I think that is going to be a monster. To me, DALL-E is going to easily be the third most important solution in the OpenAI portfolio, GPT-4, Whisper, and then, or maybe the fifth if you think of ChatGPT separately from that, or maybe the third if you think ChatGPT separately that. But all these things, I think, they need to make it more available because there's so many competitors out there right now. Don't provide any friction in the sign-up process.
Yeah, and I think what's notable is that OpenAI is not blind to some of the those issues surrounding it. I mean, while they are making GPT-4 available, they're sort of moving things through the pipeline. 3.5 Turbo, which is has been behind ChatGPT and so many others, is now in the API. So there's more access to that. They are starting to phase out some of the very old models, but what they're trying to do is really streamline the access so that depending on your needs, you can use different models. And I think that's sort of options are going to be key for especially the enterprise opportunities in the future.
Absolutely. So I think this is a good thing that they're doing this. One other thing did leak. Maybe we'll have some more on this next week, but GPT-4 architecture leaks. The architecture itself, some of the details. They're talking about a 1.8 trillion parameter model, which is, I guess, roughly 5 times larger than the previous model, maybe 6, somewhere between 5 and 6 times larger than the previous model. Also, a very large data set, training data set, over a trillion. So I think I said trillion, 1.8 trillion parameters, and actually a training data set. It may be as many as 5 trillion tokens, although some of those are duplicates because if you sort of add different data sets together, you have some overlap. We're still working on verifying that this is true. SemiAnalysis reported on it. Some others have posted some things about it. There's a lot of very interesting elements with it. Looked like maybe it cost 63 million to train, well, a single training run, 63 million, although with the new NVIDIA chips, that probably would be a third the cost of that. Any thoughts on what you've seen so far on this, and whether you think there's any truth to it, or it's just like people trying to get clicks?
I mean, it's one of those things where it is believable enough. Like I wouldn't be surprised. There's nothing in there that makes me think, oh, this can't be right, or it's way too big, way too small. But the fact that OpenAI was being a little bit coy about these numbers, when in the past they've been a lot more open about how they're training, or the amount of what kind of data is being used. I think what people are going to really draw from it is, where is OpenAI focusing in terms of trying to stay on the cutting edge, and where are they maybe not investing as much. And I think that if this does turn out to be true, you're going to see some shifts in how their rivals are approaching their future training programs.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. And on the Lex Friedman podcast, Sam Altman did say that they really think that the data, the curated data, the amount of data, is maybe becoming the big strategic advantage for them. We also know, like, if it is a 1.8 trillion parameter model, that would explain why it's so slow. And it'll get faster, but it's not going to get incredibly faster. All right, folks, this is the Gain Show, Generative AI News Rundown every week. Those were our top stories. We've got many more coming up. Funding fountains next. Just a couple of quick things. Let us know where you are. If you're out there in the chat, just say hello, comment on any of these topics, or ask questions. We'll try to work it in best we can. This is always fun for us. And by the way, if any of you guys are in the conversational AI industry, want to join me in London or online, there's actually an online version of at the Unparsed conference coming up in a couple weeks. Just go to bit.ly/unparsed 2023. You can put that in there. It's unparsed lowercase in the bit.ly world. And actually, if you use the term VoiceBot, you get 2 tickets for 1. I think it's going to be really good. There's some really good folks on the conversation design side, and we're talking a lot about generative AI and how that's impacting the user experience models that everybody's using. So that's definitely something I would recommend people turn their attention to. Now, we go to one of our favorite segments, and that is the funding fountain. And our friends over at voices.com, also known as Voice.AI, because they own that as well, they raised $6 million.
Yeah, it's
wait, actually, is this voices.com? Yeah, this is.
No, I was about to say it's Voice.AI, and believe me, it's been a while getting confused about which was which. That plural.
Oh, they own voices.ai. So I'm sorry. And they have a new product coming out. So I messed this up. Okay, so tell me about Voice.AI and their $6 million fund.
Yes, so Voice.AI, they're a speech-to-speech converter, essentially putting a filter over what you say so that it sounds like someone else is saying it. They've been very popular in certain segments of the video game content creators, social media content creators. They have a huge library of voices, and they allow people to make their own. It's one of those niche groups, but where, even though it's not necessarily millions and millions of people, the people who do use it are very invested in it. Their Discord community has been helping them iterate really quickly. They have 120,000 plus people in the Discord community, and they honestly have more people interested in their technology than they can handle right now. Hence the need for more money. But this is very much like part of the larger funding fountain story, is that some segments seem to be drawing a lot of investments regardless of the size of the company. And Voice.ai is small. It's not NVIDIA, it's not Meta, but what they have with their synthetic voice generation, especially the real time aspect, is something that really can convince a lot of people will happily sign up for a subscription to that for access to it. Well, and I think that this is part of that.
I just had Voice Mod on the VoiceBot podcast.
Yeah, I was about to say that, and yeah, Voice.AI is hardly alone in.
Jaime Bosch. I mean, and this was one of the inflection points that they had a couple of years ago. Now, let's just think about this. So they raised $6 million. Is this a big market? Well, VoiceMod had 5 million users pre-pandemic. They had 25 million post-pandemic, and then since in the last year and a half, they've up to 40 million users. Now that's all-time downloads. I don't know how many are active. They didn't reveal that information, but this is super popular. Um, and I really like this. And oh, by the way, folks, there's some breaking news around ChatGPT, which
Oh, the
we'll
FTC,
bring
yes.
up after the funding fountain stories. We'll slide in there. Don't let me forget, Eric. We want to bring that in. Things are moving so fast. A good question here is, how will this affect the voice acting industry? Well, it's affecting it in two ways. So first of all, like I mentioned, voices.com, they have a new solution coming out, which is basically enables all these types of things, but also licensing. And they have a bunch of voice actors that they've talked to, and they're the biggest marketplace for voice acting talent out there. And these voice actors want to have a synthetic version of their voice so they can license it out. They don't have to like show up. They don't have to do the work. It just, and there's different terms associated with it. It's definitely changing things. If they opt in, then they have basically a new product. They have more scalability. If they don't opt into it, then maybe they have exclusivity. But this is a very large market. There's a lot of people that are in there. It's very competitive. There's a few people who are sort of well known. And I think it's gonna be tough. I think what voices.com is doing is actually really interesting because there's this whole process, there's this licensing schema, everything, which is good for the people who are buying the voice actors because they know what they're getting. There's like this certitude, but then it's also good for the voice actors. But with that said, it's definitely going to impact this industry. I don't know if there'll be more or fewer voice actors 2 years from now. There's definitely going to be a lot more of this online content with synthetic voices. And most likely, I think some of the marginal folks who are just sort of dabbling in the voice acting world will probably fall out. The people who are the professionals will maybe do better.
Yeah, and what's interesting is because there is so much interest in, and as we'll talk about in another funding round, there's so much interest in developing this industry in its various forms. I think that the same goes for how they deal with voice actors or how they deal with control and ownership of not only the voice models themselves, but like how they're used and who gets to say where they're used or what they're used for.
All right, so let's stay in this topic. Our friends over at ResembleAI raised $8 million. So there's a couple things here. They have voice cloning. They've got speech to speech, speech to text. Some really powerful tools. They've had a lot of success over the years. You've reported on them. They were, I think, part of our Synthetia 2 event back in December. We've known Zohaib. I met Zohaib when he was in an incubator. Like the company wasn't even, I think they just named the company. They'd sort of founded it, went into the BetaWorks incubator. He was on the VoiceBot podcast. It was like 4 years ago or something like that.
It was almost to the day, in fact. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah, that's right. Because they had their demo day would have been the very end of June. And I was up in New York, watched it, met a lot of great folks. There's some folks who've done well out of that. In any event, they have a new funding round. They've got the new speech to speech technology, and they have a deepfake voice detector. This is something I've been predicting since December, January, or something like that, very openly talking about the fact that this is coming. And actually voice might be the first place that it like really hits.
Yeah, it's impressive. I mean, it's money for this kind of thing. The idea of easily and quickly creating a voice, creating a model, or using a model to say whatever you want it to say for whatever context. But then looking beyond that on on both an ethical and a business level, ResembleAI what's impressive is that not only they actually have two kinds of deepfake detectors, because one that we've seen pop up, one that Meta has made and a few others, is specifically designed around detecting their own technology. So Meta's deepfake detector is really for if people are using their voice cloning technology. And this sort of audio watermark thing is something that Resemble's been ahead of, and they've been upgrading and improving their version of that. But they also created a deepfake detector that's designed to detect any kind of manipulation. So even if somebody's using a voice cloning tool from PlayHD or whoever, or 11 Labs, then you could use Resembles to determine whether or not it is fake. And they claim that it's almost 100% accurate when it's a technology or a voice that it's familiar with. But even still, in the 80s percentage of accuracy for when it's a brand new voice. And if, assuming all those numbers are true, then this is the kind of technology that a lot of entertainment industry bigwigs are gonna want to have to make sure that they're keeping control of their face, their voice going forward.
I think it's a big market. I think it's a really interesting move for them. 11 Labs, had something where it'll detect its own voices or verify whether it was a voice created in 11 Labs. It is a leap from there to do voice detection. But you could see that they might head in that direction. I think we mentioned that actually 3 weeks ago on this very podcast, that looks like they might be accessing a new market. ResembleAI said, yes, we are accessing this new market. And I believe that this is a order of magnitude larger than the current market they're in. Plus it's less competitive because the synthetic voice market is very competitive. A question here is, won't this lead to an arms race between clones and detectors? I think the answer is yes. I mean, the clones are here for sure.
True.
But do we need tools to detect? I'd say yes. I think we need them easily accessible.
Yeah, and it's also that, I mean, this won't necessarily apply everywhere, but but 11 Labs for instance, has a deepfake detector that's aimed at its own technology, and if theoretically, if all of the big synthetic voice makers create their own watermark or have something like that, then it'll at least be harder to slip a deepfake by without getting caught.
Okay, and there's a quick question here from Nigel. Do you think this tech is new or was available for some time and being suppressed? Actually, no, I don't think it was being suppressed. I just don't think that the market demand is metastasized yet. And so as that grows, you'll see a lot more of these. I've actually known of companies that have been working on this for a while. But they've been trying to perfect the solution. They've been actually doing some early trials. So it is relatively new, but there are solutions out there, and much more. You're going to hear a lot more about it because the demand is starting to come from the enterprise level. And I think like cybersecurity and other types of protections that people have, this will just be a type of protection that they have to make sure that their customers aren't subject to voice clone fraud scams, that their content is verified and that type of thing. Now we need to keep moving because we have a lot today. Prompt engineering startup Vellum AI raises $5 million. So I think this is an interesting story. I think there's a lot more to be said here. This company was doing actually something different, and they started using generative AI to write emails and all these other types of things. And then they realized, oh, this prompt engineering is kind of a thing. They really do focus a lot on prompt chaining and some other techniques that people might be familiar with in order to make the models work better for custom applications. And to me, I'm not sure if this is a feature or a product, but right now it needs to be a feature because people haven't added it to their products with any significant amount. Maybe VoiceFlow, a few others have something like this, and clearly like LangChain, and there's a lot of solutions out there on this. But the fact that we have what looks like a software-led services solution in this space, and they're getting some fundraising, makes total sense to me, because prompt engineering is actually in many ways more powerful in getting the output you want than fine-tuning or even embeddings.
Yeah, and I think it ties into several things. One is that this blur ChatGPT and these things have blurred the lines between being a technical worker of a programmer versus a non-technical person doing it, who doesn't need to learn how to code because it's acting as a mediator and it's getting better at doing that. And in this case, it's essentially taking it one step back and helping you write the natural language code essentially to get something accomplished.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's hit another one. Prolific raises $32 million to train and stress test AI models using its network of 120,000 people. Another thing that I predict, I've told several folks about this, that evaluating, training, stress testing, all these things that live between the POC and elevation to a production system are going to be really significant. Some people are going to production this year. Most enterprises are going to POC this year and will be thinking about production if the POC is successful for 2024. What are they going to do to reduce their risk? One thing, they need to make sure that they minimize or eliminate hallucinations. That's really important. They don't want that risk. But they also want to make sure that it works and works well. And this strikes me as fairly obvious. Now, I will also say that this should be Applause's business. Like Applause should own this space, because they have a lot more than this in terms of the amount of people they have available, and they can do it in every country and all the other types of things. But I think what we're seeing is some companies are just like jumping into the space saying, hey, I'm a choice. This is something you're going to be thinking about. I have a way for you to do this very easily.
Yeah, and it also it points to what OpenAI certainly doesn't like to emphasize too much, but just how much human input is still necessary to make the AI look like it's doing everything. I mean, there's so much involved in inputting and organizing data, and this extends that into closer to the final product, but it's still the crucial human element of filtering out things that are nonsense, or being able to instantly tell which of two things is better. It'll get better. The AI will get better as it learns from these stress tests, but these stress tests are really important if they want to have a high level of accuracy and effectiveness.
Yeah, and you want to be able to do that very quickly. So somebody who already has access to real human testers, we can't do just a complete system test here on all this stuff. All right, so another thing that's not a VC funding round, but it is money, and this is the money fountain section. KPMG plans to invest $2 billion in AI and cloud services. Now, this might be broader than just generative AI, but it was like characterized as generative AI. So $2 billion, they expect there to be a $12 billion return just in generative AI over the next 12 years. So that looks like a pretty good return on investment. But I think this just speaks to the larger idea that big companies, this is a consultancy, service-based businesses, knowledge workers, this is where these knowing engines like the LLM-backed assistants really shine. They have really big upside here. You know, they're doing layoffs. They're trying to figure out how to improve productivity of the people they have. They still want to grow. They want to keep their costs down, and they want to be experts in this so they can deliver these type of solutions for their customers. This seems like a pretty straightforward investment. And we saw from PwC just, I think it was 2 months ago, they committed $1 billion. This wasn't as specific to like Microsoft and working with OpenAI, but a lot of people are doing it. And what we're seeing once again is the first stop is Microsoft and OpenAI, and then everything else is sort of the alternative.
Yeah, I mean, those kinds of headlines can be misleading, but they're making their deal with Microsoft bigger. They're putting more money into using more of Microsoft tools and potentially other tools. But what it really says is, it says to their stockholders and it says to other people that the blue chip, more conservative business giants are saying, well, yes, this is real. This is going to change how business works, and we are going to be part of it. Absolutely.
Okay, so we also have another story here, totally related. AI is seen as fueling Microsoft a $3 trillion value in Morgan Stanley model. It's rallied 42% already this year, adding $750 billion in value. The analyst raises price target to $415, which is the second highest on the street. And this just goes, like, if you look at that, if the story we just talked about is $2 billion over 5 years, that's $400 million a year into Azure. Some of that goes to expenses for OpenAI or something like that. But that's like meaningful net additional cloud revenue for Azure, which may not have been there a year ago.
Yeah, and it's amazing because we're talking about Microsoft, which has been around forever, has been a giant forever, but suddenly has the dynamic prices of a smaller startup in terms of the speed of growth. But what that headline doesn't point to necessarily is how a rising tide lifting, well, for instance, NVIDIA quite a lot as well.
Okay, so that's Funding Fountain for the week. Thanks for wrapping that up for us. We do have breaking news in just a moment, but I'll just say, hey, this is GAIN, the Generative AI News Rundown. We do this every week on Thursdays. Join us live if you're watching this as a recording afterwards. If you do miss it, you can always go to youtube.com/the @Voice.AI to sign up and see the old episodes. We had a great one on site last week. The audio was a little off, but boy, it was so good. Talking about education, the Russell Group, and how which is like Cambridge and University of Edinburgh, a lot of 24 leading universities, adopting generative AI, but trying to do it ethically. We had great stories about theory of mind and whether like GPT-4 really has that, emergent abilities, all these things. So it was really fun. Tobias Dangle and Patrick Wright from Willow Tree joined me, and we were on site. So join us in the future. this is what we do. We talk about what's going on. And occasionally, when we are in the show, I got to share my screen again. I think I took it down. See if I can pull that back up. Yes. So the FTC is investigating ChatGPT maker OpenAI for possible consumer harm. The Federal Trade Commission is investigating ChatGPT maker OpenAI to understand if the company has violated consumer protection laws. Then there's some other information here.
Yeah.
It's a civil investigative demand. I guess this isn't that surprising that something like this might come up, as all these agencies are sort of jockeying for relevance in this space. But we've seen it in the EU. Looks like now it's coming to the US.
Yeah, and there are two elements there. One is about whether it's harming consumers in its data collection, and the other being are the hallucinations and incorrect responses their own kind of harm. And in both those cases, there are lawsuits ongoing and pending about those exact topics. So it makes perfect sense that the FTC is now going to look into it as well if it's starting to become an issue in the courts. So these wheels move slowly, but there's a lot of power behind them. So this could be a major step towards some sort of regulatory system in the US about AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this is something that we should expect to see more of. And, who knows where it goes. But I think this is one of the things that all of the generative AI foundation model providers have to bake into their business plan is costs for regulatory compliance. We talked a couple of weeks ago about how basically none of the LLMs comply fully with the EU AI Act as written. That means they have a lot of work to do. Even if some of them are close, they're still not in compliance. So over the next couple of years, it's going to be a thing. And fines are just part of doing business these days, if you're in the technology circles. Okay, so that's breaking news. You heard it here first, folks. I'm sure that'll evolve over the next few days, but likely over the next several months and maybe even years, depending on how aggressive the regulatory enforcement looks like. All right, so we want to move on to the next segment, which is the generative AI product garden. So we have the funding fountain and we have the product garden, because once you have water, you can actually grow some things. We have Shutterstock with some news about indemnity.
Yeah, this is it's been popping up a lot from synthetic media developers. They're basically they're saying Shutterstock, and Adobe said it, and I believe Microsoft recently said it as well, that, hey, if you're using our tools to make images and someone sues you over it, saying that, oh, you're infringing copyright, we will handle the legal side of things, cover the cost, because we're so confident that we're not violating IP rules or any copyright laws that we'll definitely win. So businesses feel comfortable to use our technology without worrying about potential lawsuits. And it's inserting that into the fine print is probably going to calm down any worried CEOs who have been exploring using image generators and things like that for their marketing or advertising.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting too. There's some comments in here from executives that are at Shutterstock, which indicates that it might be that they may have been planning this all along, because like in October when they announced this, they did announce some things related to this, but not indemnity for sure. They want to compensate artists and all these other things. But based on the comments that they made, it seems like maybe some of their corporate customers were asking for this and saying, hey, I'm not going to use this extensively without it. It seems like it's just like it was a friction to adoption, and Adobe and Shutterstock both said, okay, I'm not going to let that keep people from adopting this.
Yeah, it's they're talking to business. They say, oh, and don't worry about any of these issues. We're only using our own things. We're compensating the artists. And so there's definitely no problem. And then the executive says, what if you're wrong? And the response to that is, well, then we'll cover that too.
Yeah, and most large enterprises are in the business of reducing risk. I mean, people think about, grow, build products. Well, there's a whole part of most of those organizations which is interested in risk. And but I think that this is going to be a bigger issue in the image space initially than it is going to be in the text space. Text is like much harder to like work on in this space. But to me, this is a key barrier for really widespread corporate adoption. It's not stopping anything else.
Yeah, I agree. Although, as we were saying before about with the FTC, I mean, lawsuits on basically everything involving generative AI are somewhere in the legal system right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, hey folks, in a few minutes we're going to do the winners and losers segment. We do this every week now, winners and losers in generative AI, and put in the chat who you think the winners and losers are in generative AI over the past week, or you could do month if you haven't done it in the past. I'm happy to take a look at that. All right, so we're gonna have to do some really quick hitters here. You wrote a story about Unity. They unveiled a generative AI marketplace a couple weeks ago. They've been working in the space a lot. Unity, one of the two largest game development platforms out there. What's going on here?
Yeah, so Unity is way ahead on talking about synthetic media and everything. But what they want to do is bring together all of the third parties that are using technology that could be useful on a Unity-derived game, and really give them a place to sell their products and a place to engage with potential customers. And a lot of people use Unity, so there's a lot of potential customers for smaller companies that want to sell their AI ideas.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I think that's actually there's a growing story there because I think that's a market that's going to really do a lot of generative AI work. So I'm interested in what Unity's doing. Nico Peroni was actually in the VoiceBot podcast a couple months ago talking about some of these things. He's the head of machine learning at Unity. So check that out if people want to see or want to listen to his perspective. He's got a really interesting background. Another product sort of announcement, not really. X.AI, the new thing, which is not X, so it's not Twitter. It's a separate company. It's the OpenAI that Elon Musk always wanted it to be, supposedly, I guess. So there's information. There's a website now. There's some information, but basically they said, oh, by the way, we'll give more information on Friday. So I don't know if there's like much more to say about this.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the modesty of their goal there of understanding the true nature of the universe. So, yeah.
Okay, so Twitter Spaces chat on Friday. Let's see, pull that down. All right, so a couple things, brands in generative AI lands. Another segment that we like to do here. Mayo Clinic begins testing Google's MedPaLM 2 AI model. What's the story here?
Yeah, so the Mayo Clinic, they're often at the forefront of medical research and including with technology. And there's been hints of this for a while, but what they're doing now is testing out the PaLM 2 is Google's giant large language model, and MedPaLM 2 is essentially the medical healthcare variation on that. And Mayo Clinic is now working to see how well that can to work to help them track patient data to diagnose patients based on their data. There's a lot of interest in streamlining how doctors figure out what's wrong with the patient.
And this is the co-pilot. This is the generative AI co-pilot for medical professionals, right?
Exactly.
And so that's like, I think that's really interesting. We haven't gotten very far with that. I mean, obviously Watson tried to do that years ago, and most of that stuff went sideways. Part of it was charging too much for too little value, I think, in many cases. But I think this is really good for Google. They're starting to carve out a niche here. We talk about these domain-specific applications, which are really going to take off. And Mayo Clinic, they're innovators. They try things. It doesn't mean they're going to continue to use it, but they're not afraid to try things and be in the cutting edge. And I think it's something definitely to watch. Now, I have a generative AI fail for us to talk about, and that's our friends over at Gizmodo.
Yes.
They used generative AI to create a chronological list of Star Wars movies and TV shows, but it was incorrect. The Gizmodo bot was blamed for this, although it led to a little bit of a dust up because the editor in charge of Gizmodo, and it's actually one of its other publications called IO9, did this. And it was basically within a few hours of this editor receiving a note from the publisher saying, hey, we're going to start publishing some things using generative AI to summarize news stories. Don't worry about it. right? and so, and then immediately something comes out and it's like factually incorrect. It didn't have the Clone Wars in it. It's like it forgot like the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show, which was like just, which was a disaster, it was terrible, but which was just broadcast live. And this editor went onto Twitter and said, "Hey, by the way, I did not have anything to do with this. They just told me about this. This is just like terrible. It's not just bad ethics. It's just bad professionalism."
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to try writing stories using an AI bot. It's another thing to say, and also you won't be editing it, and it will just publish by itself, and you'll have no control over any of it. Which, you know, it tells that editor what some of the higher-ups may think of his job, but it also, the results shows that actually they're wrong, and what he does is kind of important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is like, you know, we've talked about Gannett, you know, more recently we talked about Axel Springer. This is happening, BuzzFeed. And like, there's a lot of fails out there, but media companies are going to do this because they're always trying to squeeze some margin out. You know, it's also a tough advertising environment for anyone who lives off of that. So they're going to try to get more page views, and more page views means more ad revenue. So just like, everyone's gonna have to like just become better consumers of information. I mean, it's the internet, and now bots are writing things. It's not just trolls, it's bots, and sometimes the stuff is wrong. So just look at that byline. If a person wrote it, I would feel more comfortable than if a bot wrote it, because what we're seeing right now is when the bots write it, a lot of times there's no human review.
Yeah, I still can't get over the idea that it was just published without any human even checking.
I know, like this doesn't happen at like big things. Like someone's got to look at it. Okay. In any event, human in the loop. This is like a big story that people should be focused on. Okay, so another story here we have is Virgin Cruises adopt deepfake Jennifer Lopez as spokesmodel. You know, we've seen some things with commercials in the past, like the young Charles Barkley and things like that with deepfakes. This one is actually a little bit interesting. Someone told me this isn't generative. Well, maybe. It depends on whether you think deepfakes are generative. But in any event, it is a deepfake. And what it allows you to do is it's like a template. It's actually, there's not really good generative stuff in there. You can basically say where you're going and all these things. And you can create this custom invitation to your friends. That Jennifer Lopez will deliver via video. It's like GenAI.
Yeah, there's two things there. One is that yes, you will get an invitation where you hear Jennifer Lopez say your name and the name of the person who sent it, and it is generative in the sense that it's a voice model saying words that Jennifer Lopez did not say. It's not replacing. It's not using her voice to say every person's name. And then the other element is
saying sailor because it doesn't understand a lot of.
Yes, if it doesn't understand, it reverts to sailor, which is the bizarre term that Virgin Cruises uses for passengers. But the other thing is that it points to, hey, guess what? Generative AI and deepfakes are now so mainstream that it can be a lighthearted advertising campaign, and people will understand what we're talking about when we tell them.
Yeah, and by the way, the deepfake's really good. For those of you who are just listening later, really high quality. I don't know like how much of this is real shots and deepfake. I'll just take them at their word that it was mostly deepfakes. But you know, it just showed a few seconds of that on the screen. I think it's really interesting, and it is also really interesting that we are, you know, that we're starting to see deepfakes for these other types of entertainment applications, which are just sort of novelty oriented, and so. You know, deepfakes, we talked about deepfake detection and fraud and scams earlier on in the Rumble story. But now, you know, we're once again seeing, hey, there's like people like this on the good side. And we'll see. I don't know if it'll be real popular or not.
I mean, we've seen the generative AI girlfriend explode. So who knows?
This is true. Okay, folks, we're set up for winners and losers of the week. And I'm going to start with losers. I get to claim the Gizmodo one. Because I was the one who found that story first. So yeah, I mean, come on, just like, don't do that. I know everyone's sort of rushing to it, and there might be some other things too, where there's like labor disputes and all these other things that are going on at some of these big publishing companies. But just basically have your editors review things. It's not to say that everything has to be written by a human. Automated Insights has been writing NCAA men's basketball stories for years. It's been writing earnings release summaries, all these things. Like AI is like writing stuff in the newsroom is not new. But in those cases, everything was checked. There's like a fact check. There's an editor looking at it. Why can't we just do that?
Yeah, again, it's stress testing the models and everything is great, but at the end of the process, you need someone to look at the result. Otherwise, you will have those issues. I mean, that's why every marketing company that says it's using AI hastens to add, and also will be looking at what produces before we publish a tweet created by AI.
Okay, so who is your loser for the week?
I'm actually combining. I'm putting Chinese AI developers as both the winners and losers for this week for a couple of reasons. Because China's finalized their regulations for generative AI, and while on the loser side, they are pretty strict. There's a lot of red tape and a lot of hoops that will definitely make it more difficult for companies there to employ generative AI for their for projects like marketing. I mean, the number of disclaimers they would have needed to add to their own version of the GenAI Jennifer Lopez thing is significant. But on the other hand, they're a lot less strict than the draft version was. The draft version was basically just stopped it dead in its tracks. So there's a lot of Chinese companies and AI developers who are simultaneously relieved and trying to push the government to relax the rules even more.
Your winner for the week.
I have to say the health care industry seems to be doing really well. There's a lot of really exciting stuff. We talked about the Mayo Clinic. The first drug trial using a drug discovered and developed using generative AI is now undergoing human trials, which could be huge for a lot of people, especially for investigating cures for some of the rare diseases. And I think it's healthcare is an industry that works slowly, but I mean, this could be very huge for the pharmaceutical industry.
Fair enough. And I will choose Anthropic and Claude because I think it'll generate more interest in their API. It has that big 100K context window that we can all use now, which is great. It's free for now. Like everyone's go use it now because at some point they'll put a paywall in front of it. It has that great summarization feature. We can upload documents, which I just love. And they're going to generate a lot of data that they wouldn't have had otherwise. It's going to be able to improve their models over time. So I think that's my winner for the week. Eric, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Adam, Nigel, Martin, and everybody who joined today. Thanks a lot for giving us a shout out, contributing to the show. We'll be back next week at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So join us live on LinkedIn or YouTube. We'd really like that. Hey, and sign up for the Unparsed conference. bit.ly/unparsed 2023. If you use the VoiceBot code, you get 2 for 1. I'd love to see you there, either online or in person. If you're going to London, let me know. That's it for today, folks. Bye-bye.